Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast. We have Geoff Matthews with us today. Geoff is the host of SIM-PAC Live. He's a broadcaster. He's a strategic communication consultant into decarbonization and circular economy in New Zealand, I believe. And Geoff, welcome to the pods. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Charles. Yeah, so I actually live in New Zealand, but I do most of my work in Australia. So essentially, it's a bigger market, and yes, I've got into sustainability. Maybe when I was really young, I had a bent for it always. So I had a bent for nature. So when other kids were walking around stomping on bugs and stuff, I was always trying to pick them up and put them out of harm's way and put them in the bushes and stuff. And I can remember even at an age of about 10, instead of when other kids were buying comic books, my sister and I put our pocket money together and got a subscription to National Geographic. So I've always had a little bit of a bent in that regard. But this latest journey was stimulated by my son, who was 19 at the time. COVID had just hit. And he said he wasn't going to have children. And I was like, what? And he said, you baby boomers are F the planet. And I said, well, first of all, I got insulted that he thought I was a baby boomer, but then he was right, and then I realized that they just saw the doom and gloom that was out there and all the negative stuff. And he said, look, why would you bring kids into the planet if it's just going to burn? And at the time, California and Australia were on fire. And so I thought, okay, Tom, and I was meant to give a speech in Brussels in Europe, and I was meant to chair a session at this big conference. And I said, why don't you come up to Brussels with me? And you'll see that there's thousands of people doing stuff all over the world. Every day there's new stuff being invented that's going to help us decarbonize. And I took him up to Brussels. But on the way, just before that, we were sitting on the couch watching the news. Now, this is probably the first time I'd ever watched the news with my 19-year-old son in his life. I don't know why we were watching the news, but Greta Thunberg come on. And Greta had been to a G20 or something, and she was protesting there. And she made this famous statement. She said, it's just blah, blah, blah. It's just blah, blah, blah. And my son turns and looks at me, and I say, it is, Tom. I've been to those international conferences. I've spoken at those international conferences. It's blah, blah, blah. And so he just looks at me and says, well, what are you going to do about it? And so sort of the challenge was on, and we went up to this conference, and I'll cut the story short, but the second speaker up, I think she was the head of climate change for the EU, one of the most powerful women in Europe. And she got up, and about 2 minutes into her speech, I wrote into my notebook and I showed it to my son. It said, blah, blah, blah. So I came back down under and decided I'd try and put a conference series together that had no blah, 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 that were actually talking about these stories of people doing stuff on the ground. And it wasn't just talking in theory and lecturing people. And so that's how SIM-PAC started. It stands for Sustainable Industrial Manufacturing Asia Pacific, but it's manufacturing means creating a whole economy that we can support anything that in a low carbon environment. So, and that's how I started, stimulated by my son.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to challenge some son notion here. Probably like his generation or a bit older. I don't think like boomers burn the planet. I think it's just like being a human, and I think it's very much being a human to point the fingers at others. But once you get like real life experience, you understand that this is way harder than you would have thought, right? And I think boomers, they certainly have some issues, right? Like, for example, not being too tech savvy and so forth. But I think it's like a human problem. That is one. And second, I'd also like to say that so far, Greta Thunberg has been blah, 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 like she didn't start a green tech company or an AI company trying to fix the environment. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think good on her. I look at, I think good on her for raising awareness and stuff. Come back to, it's hard. This is the biggest thing I deal with in my job. And it's not as hard as you think. yes, there are some things that we don't have technological solutions for now, and we will develop them in the future. We need new tech to do that. But you wouldn't believe the easy wins, the stuff we can do today with existing technology, changing our behavior. And so I look at it this way, and when we say the baby boomers, what it was is that we used a fair share of the planet's resources, and we had a good life. And I'm throwing myself in that at my age. You know, I look back at the eras I grew up and started working and got married and things like that. They were good eras. But what we can do today, there's just so much. And the blah, blah, blah is people want to talk about the hard stuff, and they don't want to focus on the easy stuff. Because I'll give you an example. Do you know that refrigeration's 10% of the world's CO2 emissions?
It's insane.
Okay, refrigeration. And if you Google, if you like, or put into Chat GDP, it's largely preventable. It's just bad management. And now, if you think about that, that is more than all of road transport, all of sea transport, and all of air transport combined. Just refrigeration. So that's what I'm talking about, easy wins. We can change that. And what's more, this is a stupid thing. It's more efficient to change it now. It will pay back. If you sort your refrigeration out, it'll pay you back within a year out of OPEX. And so you can, and what am I talking about? Like if you make something cold, you're going to make it hot. So this hot air is just vented outside. Now, I've got a company in Queensland that took the hot air from the compressors of a big bakery, and they used the hot air to preheat the water that was going into the wash-up. They improved the whole business because the wash-ups were being done faster and hotter, because it meant they were getting water at 55 degrees for free. In fact, it wasn't for free. They'd already spent the money and the energy to heat the water, to get that heat. They just reused it, and then it meant that they were only topping up to get their hot water at the temperature they wanted. So little things like that we can do today, and that loop paid for itself just in no time at all. It's free energy. And that's the sort of thing we've got to be doing across everything, and look for the easy wins, because we're all sitting there trying to debate the hard stuff, you know, decarbonising air transportation. Yeah, that's a difficult ask, but it's only less than 3% of the emissions. Go and do the big stuff. Go and do the easy stuff.
Right. Yeah. I think humanity is a gigantic boat to turn around, you know, and I believe also like people, well, it's been proving that people in poverty do not consume lots of energy, but I believe that there's still that class of people that is becoming from lower class to middle class, and that,
yes,
that is still like a gigantic shift because these people are going to want to consume. What are your thoughts on AI? One, the data centers that seem to consume lots of energy, is that getting better? And yeah, will AI actually solve that problem? Super intelligence.
Yes. Look, I see economics driving this. And the reason I see economics driving it is because there's a lot of vested interest in keeping the status quo. And I'm particularly critical here of the fossil fuel industry. And also the people just don't want to change because it's like, oh, you know, I just want to keep doing this till my retirement. It's like, get out of the way. But especially down here in Australia and New Zealand, you're seeing renewables flooding into the market because it's so cheap, and people can install it on their roofs. And I'll give you an example of what I talk about in Australia is the Queensland coal miner. So there's a lot of coal being pulled out of Queensland, out of the ground. I mean, a lot, you know, it's most of the stuff in the world. And these coal miners are fighting for their jobs. We want to be able to, you know, pull coal out of the ground and export it around the world. But then they go home and they've all got solar panels on their roof and wash themselves off after a hard day's work with free hot water they've got from the sun. And so you have this thing with human beings, and yes, we are complex creatures that, you know, we want to fight for our coal job, but the solar hot water is really great. So, and that's what's going to, and when things are more economic, even the politicians or the vested interests can't deny you. And in this regard, back in about 2019, maybe 2017, I gave a speech in Warsaw in Poland on the future of electricity. And one of the things I called for at the time was an indice or an index of the freedom of renewables. That is the freedom for people to be able to install and use their own power. And this is especially aimed at third world countries, because that ability is highly regulated. And there are countries like Greece, which is not meant to be a third world country, meant to be an EU country, but you've got to, for anything over 2 megawatts, you've got to go and win a government auction to build it. Then you've got to put that power into the grid and then buy it back off the government. You aren't free to go and install solar power, which in a place like Greece is really, really cheap. So and it was my contention at the time that renewables would drive economic growth. And I talked to the IEA about it, and it's the International Energy Agency, and they said, back at the time, they said there's no evidence to suggest that renewable energy, cheap energy price, drove economic growth in first world countries. They did say there was some evidence in third world countries. And then lo and behold, last year, in fact, 2023, they come out and they changed their mind and said, well, renewable energy is going to drive economic growth and jobs in the future. And you could see it on the wall. And so I think that those third world countries, the way to uplift their standard of living will be through principally solar power, possibly a little wind, but the solar power will get so cheap that it will be able to uplift communities around the world.
And is clean tech being environmentally sustainable? Is that profitable? Can money and eco responsibility go hand in hand?
Yeah, look, yes, I think the big thing is decarbonising the world's energy systems. That's the big CO2 emissions. But some of the tech that will come out, and we need it to get to the end. So there's this big chunk of emissions that we could do today. We just need to organise ourselves better. And there's stuff that's going to be hard. And there's also a lot of red herrings on the way. There's a lot of, I'll give you an example, the use of hydrogen in our energy system. So you've probably heard a lot of hydrogen hype, and there's a lot of money being wasted. And the thing about hydrogen and why it's being wasted, and some would blame the fossil fuel industry. I'm not sure about that so much. I blame humans rather than fossil fuel. But they promoted it to the politicians, who then flooded the market with incentives for hydrogen, because they thought, we could just continue driving our cars as they are. We can continue flying and using trucks. We're just going to put hydrogen in instead of petrol or diesel. And that was never going. That writing was on the wall years ago. And I know in the one market you can see it was on the wall. 2023, China put 600,000 electric buses on the road in 1 year. 600,000, and they put 1,500 fuel cell buses on. So it was done. The race was won by electric and batteries back in 2023, and we're still running trials and trying to do this. We don't need hydrogen for that. We need hydrogen for some of the harder stuff, like decarbonising high temperature heat, which was currently no other way to do it. We can't do it through electricity. We've got to burn stuff. What are we going to burn? That'll be hydrogen. So that whole hydrogen souffle, as Michael Liebrick calls it, that's a distraction. And it's an expensive distraction, and people will put up their hands and say, see, it doesn't work. We should have burnt fossil fuels all the time. And it was like, it was a distraction.
And your specific company, SIM-PAC, do you feel that award is the way to go for a company to make progress, like to be proud of themselves? Like, wouldn't it be like clear KPIs that would show their customer, their investor, that they are green, and how do you actually rank them up to see like who wins the award?
Yeah, we give out, we've actually got the SIM-PAC Live Sustainability Awards at the end of the year, and we've got them in 23 different categories. But the one thing you've got to recognise at the moment is nothing is probably truly circular, maybe subsistence farming. So no one can put their hand up and say, look at us, we're perfect. That's the one thing, is that best you can go, look at us, we're trying really hard. And that's the thing we've got to reward. We've got to understand the people who are trying really hard, and the people are giving lip service to saying, oh, look at us, we're trying really hard, but they're doing the minimum amount. And that is very confusing in the public, and you've got to give it the sniff test. And some people say, for example, humans, if we want to buy a pair of sneakers, and we love those sneakers and they're the right color, and they're like, oh, wow, we'll believe anything on the label. Oh, look, it says it's not made with child slavery in a factory in Cambodia. Good, we'll buy it. You know, we like that. That's humans, and so we've got to. I think that we do have to put it under a bit more scrutiny and give ourselves the test of, for example, what I'm talking about. I ordered my kids some cards to play some games online, you know, like a card that had a credit on it. And I ordered it off Amazon. And lo and behold, in New Zealand, it came in a box, air freighted to New Zealand. And I stood there with that box. You could have put this in an envelope. And I took it up to my kids and I said, we can't order anything from Amazon ever again. And they agreed with me. Somebody had put 2 cards, just like credit cards, in a box, put packaging in so it was empty space, and put it on a jet and flown it from the United States all the way to New Zealand. Then it got delivered to my house by a courier. And you go, you know, you can't do that. So at some stage, people have got to go, I can't do that. It's like squashing the bugs in the playground. Do you really, these creatures are helpless and small, do you squash them, or do you put them out of harm's way? You've got to make your own decisions.
Yeah, sometimes it's quite ridiculous, right? In the amount of plastic that they put in there. I think these companies are getting, more conscious of that, more sustainable. But still, it's pretty appalling when you see that. So maybe send them feedback as customers, or just order someplace else where they are more eco-responsible as a consumer. My question was more around the awards, though. How do you determine scientifically who gets the awards this year? Because there's a bunch of awards company that award to the highest bidder, right?
Yes.
So what are the factors for you to actually elect the winning company?
Oh, well, I've got a great panel of judges. I have got 4 very influential, highly intelligent women who are on my panel of judges. 3 of them are doctors, and 1 of them is a real expert in the field. And so we look at what's behind these companies, and we're not dealing so much with big companies. A lot of this is new tech, smaller companies. You know, in terms of innovation, that's where I see it coming from. I see it coming from the grassroots. And there's lots of stuff happening out there. And yes, there are hurdles for them. You know, there's some great companies doing great stuff and they can't get traction. And that's a pity. And one of the things I try and do with my podcast, SIM-PAC Live, it's on YouTube, is that I try and tell their stories. Because if you want to change the world, you've got to talk to people. And you've got to tell stories, and that's part of it. But for our judging panel, we've never had a problem. I've looked at a couple of things and thought, I don't know about that. I think that you're barking up the wrong tree there. But they quickly sort themselves out. We almost have outstanding contributions, and so they're clear winners. So we've never had to sit there and go through somebody's financials or look at stuff. It's clearly obvious what they've done. And I mean, there's some great stories. There was one in Australia where somebody completely put a whole poultry farm onto solar panels and batteries and completely decarbonized it that way. Now, that's really, by the way, people said it couldn't be done, and they changed the whole industry by proving it could be done. Those are the sorts of, stories that we get coming through. Oh, and the other one, the bakery. I love the bakery one because bakers would always bake early in the morning because they used to have people coming in the door first thing. And of course, the big bakeries don't have anyone coming in the door anymore. So one of the first things they did with this bakery was they convinced them that they should bake at 10 in the morning when the sun came up in Australia, and there was lots of renewable energy, virtually nothing, at no cost. And then, so they changed their whole baking. They just shifted the factory to start at 10. And, it's so obvious, but they'd been baking at 6 in the morning forever. And that was one of the things about the easy wins. We just got to look at why are you doing it? Oh, because we've always done it that way. Why wouldn't you bake in the middle of the day when there's lots of solar power?
Yeah. I guess the argument against or for that's like, running a business, right? And some batches need to be made earlier. Typically bakery, there's batches of clients so that it's fresh as well. But I understand what you're saying here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive pie company making millions of pies. It all goes out. It's all days old. You know what I mean? It's not
a small time bakery. Okay.
No. They probably started off selling to customers that were on the way to work, 40 years ago.
Got it. Last but not least, your podcast. How do you select your guests? What's your thesis behind the podcast? What do you want to get out of it, and what have you got out of it so far?
So mine's to tell these sustainability stories and to dig a little deeper into them, and also give a voice to those pieces of innovation that's not being heard. And again, it comes back to my son, saying that he didn't want to have kids. And it's like, well, there's lots of people doing amazing stuff. And the more we can get those stories out, the faster the adaptation. I look at it and I go, my big dream would be to help speed up the transition to zero carbon, and by telling these stories, because when people get engaged with these stories, and also I think genuinely people walk around and go, oh, it's too hard, we can't do it. And there's just so much we can do, as I said, with today's tech that exists now, that we should make a start. And that's what everyone should do. It's what every business should do, is make a start.
Well, Geoff, thanks for being on the podcast today. Where can people find out more about you?
SIM-PAC, that's SIM-PAC.com. And that's the company address. And I've got my podcast, SIM-PAC Live, on YouTube.
That was Geoff and Charles for another Founder Wisdom